Hello everyone, so the Honkai Star 1.6 livestream recently came out like a day and a half ago and a lot of exciting news. We had information about Ranmei, Dr. Ratio, we also had sneak peeks on the Penacony characters and Penacony in general. 2.0 is coming out soon, and the news that everyone has been raving about, a free Dr. Ratio 1.6, literally giving the Genshin players the L plus ratio. Trust me, I'm fine, I'm not jealous. But the one thing that they covered that I thought was one of the most important things that I'm the most interested in is the new endgame systems that they're introducing in 1.6. In 1.6, they're adding Memory of Chaos 11 and 12, very exciting, and the one that I want to focus on today is the new endgame system, Pure Fiction. And they gave us a little bit of actual information on how Pure Fiction works, and I wanted to kind of analyze the footage that they gave about Pure Fiction a little bit and kind of understand and tell you guys how this new endgame combat system works and how we can best prepare for this new endgame content. So they did make a post about it, but I found that the live stream gave a little bit more details. Just quickly going on stage 11 and 12, I don't think there's much different that we have to prepare about it. It's just Memory of Chaos 11 and 12 is just harder enemies, whoopee. But Pure Fiction is much different, and they're going to be alternating, so we will have to be prepared for this new endgame system. So just scrolling through the little bit of information they gave in this post, we can see that there's going to be two teams. We're going to have to set up two teams just like MOC, and the idea of this endgame combat is that enemies will continually respawn, and we just have to kill as many as possible, and the more enemies that we kill, the more points that we get, and if we get a certain amount of points, we'll get those certain amount of stars for those juicy rewards. In addition, for each team, we get to choose a single buff, a special buff for that specific Pure Fiction stage that will help us in the battle and clear more enemies. So just not even looking at the actual footage that they gave, just describing and reading this post, this type of content is actually something that we've experienced before. If you played in 1.2, there was an event called Tales of the Fantastic, and the battle event content is pretty much what they're describing in Pure Fiction. We have a buff that we can choose that will help us in battle, and the point of the battle combat event is to kill as many enemies as possible, and they keep respawning to get a higher score. So they pretty much just took this event as like a testing ground and then put it in as an actual endgame system, which, I mean, props to them for actually adding another endgame system. But because of that fact, we can gain a lot of information about how Pure Fiction works just from seeing how this event works. So you can see for just this specific stage, scene 1, we have a total of 4 cycles because it's going to be 3, but counting the 0 cycle, we have a total of 4 cycles to clear as many enemies as possible. And as you can see, they kill enemies, just kill enemies, continue killing enemies, and the AV doesn't change. It's just, you have 3 cycles remaining, you're now in the second cycle, and the turn order just stays the same. And that idea will come more important later. I'll bring it up again, so keep that in mind. So let's just go back to the actual live stream for a moment and see what they actually showed us. So Pure Fiction, we have total 4 stages, blah, yada yada. Again, 2 teams, and we can see that the goal is 60,000 points. And then here we have like an example of some buffs that they give us. We can kind of read here that this is in the Argenti centric buff as it buffs ultimates. We also see here that they also have a dot centric buff. Now on to the actual combat that they briefly showed. So I want you to pay attention to kind of the beginning of this gameplay. So the interesting thing that they show here is that we're at 0 score, so we just started the battle, right? And what did we see here? So we see that countdown for the cycles is 4. So the amount of total cycles that this stage limits us is 5, because we have the 0th cycle and then 4 remaining ones. So a total of 5 cycles to clear as many enemies as possible. In addition, we can see on the top right, there's actually a wave count, which is kind of interesting. So my assumption of that feature is that enemies will continually spawn until we kind of reach that limit, and then that would be like the first wave, and then once we clear all those enemies after they've all respawned in that first wave, we're gonna get the second wave, and it repeats until we kill everything, which is, you know, cool, or time runs out. And then just to read it here, we can see Argenti kill 4 mobs, right? So 4 mobs to clear with an elite to the left, and then just 4 enemies just respawn again. This is the dot centric Pure Fiction, and we can see that even with this stage, same thing, wave number 1 out of 3. 4 cycles remaining, so a total of 5 cycles because we're on the 0th cycle. So that was pretty much all the footage that they gave us on Pure Fiction as of now. So what can we do with that information? So first of all, let's just talk about the most important thing, which is how the cycles work, because we have a certain time limit. So how does this time limit work differently than what we usually experienced in MOC? Now, I talked about this and I drew this paint thingy in my previous video on explaining how the cycle change of MOC when they reduced the cycles changed the difficulty of MOC. And in that video, I explained how cycles in MOC actually work. So just to kind of quickly summarize what's going on in this photo. So if just give an example, MOC 10, let's say, we have 10 total cycles to clear both halves of MOC 10 in order to get 3 stars. Since there's 2 teams that we have to play, I split it into 5 and 5, and then each half has 2 waves. Typically, the second wave has a boss, so it's typically harder, so I split those 5 cycles into 2 and 3. But the important thing I want to say about this is that when you're on wave 1, and let's just say, okay, you took in your first cycle, the 0th cycle, you haven't cleared all the enemies yet, there's an elite, alright, so then you're on the first cycle, still haven't cleared the enemy, so you're on your 2nd cycle. Let's just say you clear this first wave during this time, right? When the next wave starts, it does not continue counting from the 2nd cycle or goes to the 3rd cycle. When you start wave 2, it will reset and count back as if you were on the 0th cycle. So just to demonstrate this cycle resetting in MOC, I'm just going to go into MOC 1 and just show you the cycle resetting in action. So I want you to pay attention to the current AVs right as the battle starts. And you see, we see 7,500 part. We can just focus on that one for now, but it should match every other character. So 7,500 part on cycle 0. Now I'm just gonna clear this wave normally, and then we'll see what happens when the next wave starts. And I'm gonna make it so that I'll clear on the 2nd cycle. So not this current cycle, I'm just gonna let it run again and then clear on the next cycle. So I'm gonna clear this wave in probably this next enhanced basic, and right now I'm on the 2nd cycle, and I want you to pay attention to the AV of all the characters when the next wave starts. I'm going to use an ultimate to kind of stall the time, and so that we can see what the characters' AVs are as the 2nd wave starts. Alright, so that guy should be okay. He's not even dead. Alright, well, you know what, that's fine, we have Clara to do it. So I'm gonna ult like right now. Oh, there you go. You see that? 75, 70, 72, 71. So these AVs should be the exact same as when we first started the chamber on the 0th cycle. Even though I took 2 cycles to clear the first wave, we started the 2nd cycle with the exact same AV. So that shows that in MOC, as you clear a wave, it goes back to the 0th cycle. It doesn't just continue counting your cycles. And this kind of resetting of cycles is very important because it alters how you actually look at the speed table and build for specific speed breakpoints. So like I said, even though in each half I can aliquot 5 cycles for each half, in practice you don't actually look at the 5th column. You should instead look at how many cycles you actually clear specific waves. So like for example 2 and 3, and then you see which speed breakpoint that you want to meet. In reality, you never actually reach this column when you want to build speed breakpoints for Memory of Chaos. However, that is for MOC. MOC is where cycles reset. But in a type of content where enemies continually respawn and we want to kill as many enemies as possible, as shown by the 1.2 event Tales of the Fantastic that I showed you, it appears that there's no actual cycle resetting happening. So the amount of cycles that it gives you is exactly where you want to look in order to build for specific speed breakpoints. Now remember, I did mention that it did say wave 1 out of 3 on the top right of the combat menu. So it could be that if they follow the MOC rule, the cycles will reset to 0 2 times because you're going to clear wave 1, go to wave 2, and then go to wave 3. So it's going to reset 2 times. However, I don't actually think that this is the case because I just think that they're going to follow this combat style of okay, you have a set amount of cycles, go ahead, that's the hard limit, and you're gonna have to clear as many enemies as possible. It seems kind of counterintuitive to me if they're going to treat cycles like MOC. It would make more sense to me if they actually just, you know, stayed at a certain cycle limit and then there's no cycle resetting at all. This is exactly what you get. What you see is what you get. So given this information, how do we prepare our unit builds? As for supports and healers and all that stuff, I always hold the belief that you just build however much speed that you want. Just go as high as possible because speed is good on supports. So I don't think you actually need to build specific speed breakpoints for support. Just go as high as possible. You don't really have to care, right? But for DPS, that is a different issue. If our DPS is able to meet specific breakpoints, we can hopefully maybe get another action in that total amount of time that we have in Pure Fiction. And maybe that extra action will help us kill maybe an enemy or two that will get us to that 60,000 that we need for 3 stars. Now remember, from the footage that they showed us, at the beginning of the battle, we could see that the counter is at 4. So we can go to the speed table and just go to 4 cycles. We have a 4 cycle limit. So if everything in the footage that they showed us on the live stream is to be true, all we need to do is look at this column to build a specific speed breakpoint for our DPS. So if we just take the typical speed breakpoint of 134, we can see that you don't actually need 134 if the time limit is actually 4 cycles. 134 doesn't give you anything. You could build 133, 132, all the way to 128, and you'll get the same amount of action numbers, 7, in 4 cycles. So if you actually want your DPS character to get an extra action, you're gonna have to aim for something higher. Now in my opinion, building for something higher just through stats alone will be difficult, because the next one, 146, that's for some DPS pretty hard. However, there are a lot of characters that buff speed, and even in the showcase that they showed in Ron-Mei, it implied that Ron-Mei also boosts speed with her field. So if you wanted to be even more in depth, you could build for a specific speed value while taking into account of speed buffs in order to meet specific breakpoints for your DPS, so they can get the most amount of actions that they can in Pure Fiction. Now the reason we can safely build for these specific speed breakpoints and confidently say we will get those amount of actions is because, number one, there's no cycle resetting in Pure Fiction as there is in MOC, and also in Pure Fiction there is a set cycle limit, and it is pretty much guaranteed that you will go to the end of that cycle limit. So what I mean is, the given cycle limit from the live stream was 4. So as you go through the fight, you'll go through 0 cycle, the 1st cycle, the 2nd cycle, the 3rd cycle, and the 4th cycle. You'll go through all the actions allotted for this 4th cycle until you reach the cycle limit, and then that's it. The only scenario where you won't reach all the actions allotted from 4 cycles is if you clear the entire stage early, which is kind of unlikely considering it's supposed to be endgame and you're supposed to reach a high enough score. And because of that, we can safely know that all of our characters will reach the maximum amount of actions given the cycle limit. In contrast, in Memory of Chaos, number 1, there are 2 waves. Number 2, you could clear faster or slower than what you thought that you were going to be building for, because you could just clear the 1st wave early or the 2nd wave early. So for example, if you build for a 3 cycle clear for 134, 6 actions, but you clear in 2 cycles, then the 134 didn't do anything. And even if you clear on the 3rd cycle, you could not even take advantage of the extra action that 134 brings. For instance, if you're clearing a wave and you're on that 3rd cycle, you're supposed to get an extra action at the 3rd cycle if you build for 134. But if, let's just say, your DPS in their 1st action already kills the wave and you're done, then you didn't take advantage of the extra action that 134 gave. So because the cycle limit works differently between MOC and Pure Fiction, and how there's no wave resetting, building for specific speed breakpoints for Pure Fiction is much safer. You can guarantee pretty much extra actions for actually building for specific speed breakpoints in Pure Fiction as opposed to Memory of Chaos. Now here's my crackpot theory. So the footage that they showed us in the live stream was just the 1st stage of Pure Fiction, and it showed that this was the cycle limit. But I have an inkling that that's just stage 1. They could easily make it harder in stage 4. That would be like our MOC 12 for Pure Fiction. They could easily make it so that it's not actually 4 cycles. They would just reduce it by 1. So I don't know if I want to trust that everything is going to be 4 cycles. It could be 4 cycles for all of them because they've homogenized all the cycle limits for MOC. But just part of me wants to say that I think we should also consider the idea that they're going to reduce the time that we get by 1 cycle in those harder stages, that stage 4 or whatever. And if that's the case, then we can see the breakpoints. Well, 134 is a breakpoint, so I think that is a safe thing to still build for. If you want to go for an extra action, 156, that might be difficult, but we can aim for 156 if we have speed buffs on our team, just to squeeze out that extra DPS action, and that could make or break the difference in getting a high enough score for 3 stars. So that is how I think we can prepare just building for specific speed breakpoints in anticipation for Pure Fiction. But how about specific characters? What characters will be good for this type of content? Well, the first thing that's obvious is that there are 5 enemies on the field and they constantly respawn. Erudition is the obvious best choice. Now I'm gonna kind of discount Servo and Ching Chui here. They don't have as much AoE. They have some blast in their kits, so they may not be as effective. So we'll just focus on the first 4 here. As we know, the release of Argenti, he's a super strong character, and he will be very strong in Pure Fiction. Even if the field just has 4 enemies, that's really good for Erudition units like Argenti. He's gonna get a lot of energy, a lot of damage with his ult, and in this type of content, he could theoretically just spam 90 cost ult and just clear all the small mobs, because we need to clear all the small mobs in order to get to that next stage. Because remember, there's supposedly 3 waves, so we need to clear all the mobs as fast as we can, so that once they stop respawning, we can finally kill everything and then go on to the next wave. Our other limited 5-star character, Jing Yuan, same thing, very strong. And I think the most interesting thing is that we look at Himiko and Herta. These characters are considered pretty low on the tier list, but if you look at their kits, they have quite a lot of AoE that perfectly helps dealing with small mobs, specifically their follow-up attacks. So I would say if you have Himiko, Herta and you actually like them, I think building them would be very beneficial for preparing for Pure Fiction. If the enemies that we encounter are fire or ice weak, you're gonna get a lot of follow-up attacks, and since, like I said, most of those mobs that we need to clear are just small, weaker mobs, that's gonna be very helpful. We need to clear all those small mobs because they're gonna take up all that space in the battle. We can only have 5 enemies in the battle, and we need the rest of them that are like waiting to respond to like spawn faster, so we can just clear as much as possible. And this kind of identity for Erudition units, I would say, makes them very valuable to build and pretty much better in a way than our common destruction characters that we say are like the best DPSs, Jingli, Danheng, Blade, because most of their abilities are blast. And if you imagine in a field of 5 enemies and you can only hit like the 3 middle ones, let's just say the elite is in the middle, well, you're missing damage on 2 guys at the end. So that means you're 2 mobs slower than an Erudition unit, because you know that there are small mobs waiting in wait in order to respawn to take in that space. But if you don't actually hit those enemies on the side, you're just going to take more time killing those small mobs. Now, will these characters be bad? Of course not. These characters are really strong, but they will be at a disadvantage when compared to Erudition units. So those are the most obvious characters that gain a lot from Pure Fiction, but I think the other subset of characters that I don't think many people talk about, or maybe not many people realize, are our support characters, because, you know, a DPS has 1 slot in the team. There's 3 other ones. One of them is probably going to be a healer, so you have 2 other slots. What are those 2 slots? Well, they're likely to be supports, and those role slots are quite important. Now, typically in like normal team building, we can pick one of the Harmony characters, or we can pick one of the debuffers that we have, specifically Silverwolf and Pella. However, just because of how Pure Fiction is just mobs constantly respawning and we're constantly killing, Nihility characters and just debuff characters in general are actually much weaker in this type of game mode. Because, for example, sure, let's just say the first 5 enemies, you put on your Pella ult, and yeah, Pella's ult is really strong, but you kill those 4 mobs instantly, and then 4 mobs spawn leaving the elite. So now you have 4 enemies that do not have her defense reduction up. Same idea goes with dot characters, because they're also reliant on debuffs on enemies. Let's just say you Kafka ult, you kill those 4 mobs and the elite is still alive. Well, the next 4 mobs that are going to come in and replace those mobs, they're not going to have a dot, so that severely limits the strengths of just debuffs in general. However, Harmony support characters do not rely on debuffs at all. They just rely on buffing your actual characters. It doesn't matter if enemies constantly respawn, you're just going to buff your character and they're going to take their turn and they're going to have the buffs that the Harmony character provides. And it's not like the debuffs that, for example, Pella and Silverwolf provides are like significantly stronger than the Harmony characters' buffs. Like, the Harmony characters' buffs are really strong and may even just be stronger than like their defense shred in general. So in Pure Fiction, I think you should really prepare to build as many Harmony characters as you want, because I think you might be at a disadvantage if you still rely on debuffers like Pella, when you could just put in like Hanya and then you just gain her attack and speed buffs with her ultimate. You're not going to run into the flaw of, oh, the enemies just respawned and I already Pella ulted, they already died and the enemies respawned and now there's no more defense shred on those enemies. So I think it would be very beneficial if you have any of these Harmony characters, build these characters. They're already really strong like in normal MOC, so just makes building them so much more valuable. And you likely already have a lot of them built, but if you have any extra resources, you know, just buff them even more. Maybe increase your Tingyu's talent level. Maybe if you haven't built Hanya, maybe consider building Hanya, you know. And if you're pulling for Ron May, definitely build her. Of course, that doesn't mean that these characters are weak. These characters are still strong. And like, for example, they showed that there's going to be a dot-centric buff for one of the Pure Fiction stages. So it's not like these oh, debuff bad, right? But you have to admit that just debuffs in general are inherently flawed when you have to kill as many enemies as possible and the enemies just keep refreshing. The new enemies just won't have the debuffs that you applied in the first place anymore. So I think that's all I had to talk about in preparing for Pure Fiction. Hopefully that type of analytical explanation kind of helped you understand what Pure Fiction is going to entail, and hope my little explanations on, for example, how cycles work and maybe my recommendations on what characters to build will help you out when the new endgame content comes out in the next version 1.6. Personally, I'm very excited for this new endgame content. I just want more incentive for me to continue building my characters and continue making them stronger, and just, you know, new endgame systems like this I really appreciate. So I'm excited to see how difficult it will be when it releases, and I'm, continuing to build my characters. The recommendations that I've discussed in this video, I'm using that same advice, so hopefully you found that advice as helpful. If you have any thoughts on the new Pure Fiction game mode or any thoughts on my advice, just, feel free to leave it in the comments. If you like this type of guide / analysis / explanation type of videos, feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you all soon. Hope you all have a good day.